morning or afternoon or evening, whatever time it may be where you are. This is our MYFest session, leaning in and leading with students, an open pedagogical approach to exploring AI with students. And before we pass it over to Lance, we just want to go through some of our community agreement guidelines. The full community agreement I will paste into the chat for folks who want to read the full thing. On the screen, I am sharing a slide that shows the first 4 of the community agreement guidelines, which are, you are welcome here. Regardless of your race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, your ability or disability, everyone is welcome in this space. And we want to make sure that everyone is also welcoming in this space. So be kind to each other, make space for others. And as we engage in conversations, we invite you to critique ideas, but not people. And again, sort of along the same lines, assume that people have the best intentions when they're sharing ideas. So if you are engaging in some critical conversation, do it with grace and invite people to respond similarly. The captions in the session are on. We invite you to turn your camera on or not. We invite you to participate either by turning on your mic, using the chat, or participate silently, whatever works for you today. If you do not wish to speak aloud, please do use the chat. The session is being recorded, so just be aware of that. And if for whatever reason you don't want your name to appear in the recording, you are invited to change your name in the Zoom settings. And you would do that by clicking the 3 dots or the menu icon next to your name in the participants list and clicking rename. If there are any access needs that you have that are not being met by the Zoom environment, by the way the presentation is flowing, please contact either me or Yasser through private messages, and we will make sure that we are making changes to address your access needs. And I think that's everything. The only other thing is we will be sharing a few times throughout the session a feedback form, which I will paste in the chat now. And we welcome your feedback on the session. We'll paste it again towards the end and right at the end. But now I'll pass it over to Lance. He'll get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danny, and thank you, Yasser, for your help in getting started. Just give me a good old second to get my screen up and running. So folks, let me ask, can you see my screen? Is my screen shared currently?
Yes.
Awesome. And I'm going to throw the link into the chat in case you want to access to this slide deck. So that's there. So, hey folks, I'm Lance Eaton. I'm the Director of Faculty Development and Innovation at College Unbound, and I'm here to share a bit about how we are navigating generative AI at our institution, really through what I believe is a powerful approach of engaging students in student voice. But before I actually get into that, I'd love for us to do a quick warm up, right? As we get into the space and we start to think about what does it mean to be in spaces with students and the like. So what I'm hoping folks will do is I'm going to put you into breakout rooms for about 4 minutes. In that room, we're going to have just a few minutes to share around. Ideally, you'll introduce yourself, where you'll be joining us from, where you're joining us from. And if you, of course, if you can't turn on your camera, sorry, if you can't turn on your camera or come off mute, that's totally understandable, but still try to engage in the chat. So the questions, and again, I'll put these into the chat as well, that I'm hoping folks will engage with, are name, location of where you're joining us. And on a 10 scale, how well are you engaging with students to collectively figure out the ideal ways of using generative AI in your courses and disciplines? And 10 is like the dream. And so not only am I going to have in this breakout room think about what that number is, but maybe a sentence or two about why that number. So if you give me 1 second, I'm going to throw folks into breakout rooms. We're going to have about 3 people per room. And let me just get to that. There might be 4, and that's fine, but we're going to just put you in there. in one moment. And like I said, you'll have about 4 minutes. I'll send just a notification when there's about 1 minute left. Does that
And
sound
just
good?
to mention that we will always be happy if you don't want to join a
Yes.
breakout room. Feel free to come back to the main room and we will strive to put you in a breakout one or just stay with us here.
Yes. Thank you for that reminder. All right, let's create the rooms. I forgot to hit open all the rooms. That's always the thing. You create the rooms, but you gotta actually open them up. So folks should be seeing that now. All right. So yeah, now that we're back, feel free to share some of what you discussed. By all means, throw it in the chat. And Denise, it looks like you right out of the gate and have something to share. Go for it.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Deniz from Istanbul, and with my mates Kim and Amal, we come from the context of EAP, architecture, and journalism. They are from Cairo, and I am from Istanbul, obviously being Turkish. And on a 10 scale, we said it would be 5. And the ways we use AI, we use with our students is, for example, I use it for discussion, like for brainstorming purposes. And if I'm not wrong, Kim mentioned generating voices, scripts. And I think it was Amal, she mentioned Mid-Journey was used for design process of a project with architecture students. Why that number? We were not able to really discuss that in depth. So maybe I could talk for myself. This could be something we all have in common. I am in the university context, and we have lots of concerns about the ethical part of using AI and also creativity part. Over reliance on such technology may be hindering students having a self-belief in their own skills. So that becomes kind of like an addiction, a dependence, which kind of brings them directly to such kind of technology rather than first measuring what they have, what skills they have, what skill sets they have. So that's the only thing I can think of at the moment. Thank you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think part of the question is like, what are the ideal ways of using it? And I think there's that interesting question of or not using it. That is a little bit of what I hear there. And I love seeing what's coming in through the chat. And I want folks to hold on to that number and kind of be thinking about it, because we'll come back to it later on and thinking about this is where we are and question of where we want to go. But what I want to do now is just switch over to talk a little bit about what we did at College Unbound. I'm going to throw the chat to my college throw the link into the chat because it's a smaller college that not a lot of people are aware of. And so I do want to do a little bit of context setting about the kind of institution that we are. So College Unbound is a newer college. It was created in the late 2000s. It still has that new college smell, if you will. We gained accreditation from NETCHI in 2020, and we provide one bachelor's degree in organizational change and leadership. In the last 3 years, we've grown from about 180 students to closer to 500 students for this fall, and we'll have we'll have iterations of College Unbound in Providence, Rhode Island, where I am, Philadelphia, Chicago, Seattle, and Greensville, South Carolina. So as a private nonprofit college, we focus primarily on adult students, often caretakers. That's about 70% of our students. And we use this mixture of cohort-based learning and project-based learning. And we really work with students to leverage previous life experience for credit and work to make sure that our educational programming centers students. So it centers students and their needs. So for instance, when we have face-to-face classes, which is only a fraction of our courses, We actually offer dinner and childcare because, again, if we have 70% of our students are parents or caretakers, like if you've got to choose between dinner, children, and education, education's probably going to lose out as it should. We also work to make sure that all of our students have laptops. So we really want to make sure they have the tools, they have the opportunities that are available, that are there for them to fully engage with their learning and to leverage their previous experiences as well. So I want to go back to winter 2022. So we know, December ChatGPT dropped, and it kind of landed with at least a thud in academia. There, most folks wrapping up their semester, wrapping up what for some felt was like their first normal, and I'll put that in air quotes, semester since the pandemic started in spring 2020. And it can be understood why folks weren't paying attention to this new tech being touted by tech bros and anyone with an opinion on Twitter. But there were folks in higher ed that were starting to have that conversation and thinking about what is this tool, and what are the things we should be thinking about. Those are folks like Maha, who's here with us, Anna Mills and Brian Alexander, myself. We started to share, and many, many others at this time, trying to like just play with it and think about it. And so I started to play with it, think about it, have some public thoughts that I shared on social media or on my blog. A colleague of mine, Autumn Keynes, who also teaches at College Unbound, came to me with this interesting question because it appeared, because she had also been playing with ChatGPT and the like, she had a sense that one of her students might have been using it. And so we talked about this, what did this mean, and what did we want, how do we want to think it through? And I'm really indebted for her insight and deliberation, because we moved from this place of angst to actually excitement and really some respect for the student who potentially used it to so quickly find a way to use this tool, right? There was a moment where we were just like, damn, way to go, right? Because this was 3 weeks after the tool had dropped. So we were just kind of in this like, well, what do you know? But there was this important moment for us because College Unbound centers student voices and works to address educational trauma that a reasonable share of our students experience at the hands of traditional higher education. We had to be careful, right? Any framework where we began to accuse students directly or indirectly felt like a dangerous place to go. And for us, one of the biggest questions and concerns was, a false positive just would be antithetical to what we stand for. So we were able to kind of have this moment where we moved forward with it. We approached it with curiosity. And so Autumn posted a note to her class saying like, hey, there's this new tool out. I think folks may have started to find it and play with it. And we'd love to hear more from you about how you're using it and what you're finding with it. We didn't actually hear back from anybody in her class, but then we took a larger step, and I'll put this into the chat as well. We put out a usage survey to the entire student body, and we started to get some answers from that. It asked if they knew about it, if they were using it, and if so, in what ways did they use it? And we got back results that showed students were using it to improve understanding, to navigate being multi-language learners, and for brainstorming. And these insights kind of right at the very beginning, again, this is December of 2022, they were really instrumental in helping me and others at my institution think about, we need to do this differently, and we need to do this not in the absence of students, but with students. So I had an idea. I realized that a course on AI in education where students and I learn about generative AI while also playing with it and thinking about it in an educational context would not just make for a great learning experience, but it'd create the opportunity for us to craft the guidelines for the institution. So it made absolute sense for us who were as an institution. And so I went to my provost, and my provost was quickly on board. And we realized, this could actually be a really cool way of not just doing it for generative AI, but actually for doing it for lots of different things around policy, technology, structure, that we could use this if it went, if it went well, that we could use this to do other ways of building in student voice. My partner, because she's also brilliant, added to the idea and recommended that I actually run the course as 2 sessions. In the first session, students would actually develop the policy, and in the second session, they would actually test drive it. And so that was actually what we ended up aiming to do and ended up doing. I'm going to put the links to the both syllabi to session 1 and session 2 into the chat. So before the class could start, I still needed to provide some guidance, some sense of like, what are we going to do and what's our strategy? So I pulled together kind of a temporary policy. And with that temporary policy, also an explanation of like, this is what we're doing right now, because folks are asking for guidance. That's both students and faculty to get a sense of like, what is and isn't appropriate. So we put that together fairly quickly and then moved into letting folks know, but there's a bigger thing coming along now. So that whole strategy, that early policy can be found in the link that I just dropped in. But at the same time, because I've been doing this kind of work for a while and I'm deeply invested in open educational practices, I began to actually crowdsource generative AI policies and syllabi, because I thought like, my faculty are going to need examples. Other people are going to have examples. Like, let's start to mix and match those. And so I created this database. Database might be a strong word, but I created this collection of resources or people's syllabi from around the country. There's now over 130 examples of their usage policy around generative AI. And it's across so many different disciplines, so many institutions. It just became a really powerful way of exploring this idea. So the 2 sessions, right? We did session 1, session 2, they were just amazing. And I can't stress that enough. Having students join a class where their work will mean something, where they will further employ their agency. It led to a lot of discoveries. It led to a lot of conversations and ways of understanding these tools that even like I just wouldn't have thought of if I were just talking with other faculty or folks in higher education. It was really powerful to see them rise to the occasion. Students had a lot of initial and complicated feelings and thoughts, and that was throughout the course. Like every week, somebody moved in some direction, and we came in to kind of discuss it and try to figure out like, what is it this week? What has happened this week based on as it was changing in spring of 2023, but also how did we find different use cases or questions that made us think differently about it. So it was really powerful to see this play out in live time, to see students anchored or really hooked in to think about the implications of this, not just for themselves, but for their school. Many of them are paraprofessionals in K through 12, so they're teachers assistants or the like. And so they were also thinking about it in like their kids' classrooms. They were thinking about it in their own kids' classrooms, because again, we have many students who are parents. So they came up with a proposed policy, and once they had that policy and we test drove it in that second session where they took that policy and they tried it with different courses, assignments in different courses to see where there was hiccups, to see where it worked or didn't. We presented that policy to our faculty for feedback, right? And the goal was for faculty to look at it and say, is this appropriate? Because it was usage for faculty and students. It wasn't just for the students, it was for everybody in that teaching and learning space. And the faculty who reviewed it, the faculty gave really good feedback. It was usually feedback that was about making sure there was parity or language clarity or the like. And once they were done with it, we actually shared, or it actually went through our faculty curriculum committee, and they reviewed it and approved it this past March for it to actually be adopted as our usage policy for students and faculty around generative AI. And I'll put the link to both the proposed policy and the final policy into the chat. So the thing is, this work has been incredibly rewarding and also challenging, right? I had doubts, I had concerns, I had to figure it out, the right balance of where and when to nudge students. I had to do this live as things continued to change, right? And have to think about a lot of different things. About this as a moving target, about what that end policy would be, about how to make sure students both felt like they could be a part of it, but also not feel overwhelmed by trying to, think at this or engage at this level. But at the end of the day, the process embodied an ethos of College Unbound to make sure that students are always part of the conversation. It felt like there was no truer way to do this. And that they have just as much stake in their education and often have a deeper understanding of how their education fits their context. And that was really powerful to see them again, time and again think about what does this mean for their work, for their kids and the like. So coming up with a method to figure out our AI strategy that both embodied that ethos and honored students, furthered their education, and enhanced our institutional understanding of the potential and challenges of these new tools was just like this was my 10. I didn't know it going in. I didn't realize it going in, but as we were talking about, how would we get to 10? Like this was my 10. It created a space for students to share what they were learning and the interesting use cases that I wouldn't have discovered if I wasn't in conversation with students. And that students really cared about this work. They were excited by it and they valued being a part of the process. And as I said, we're also examining this now as a model for how we think about engaging students about what gets done or how we develop different things. Many of us are at institutions that will create a committee and they'll put one student on there with 10 or 15 different people, each with titles that are 3 miles long. And this was a really interesting, powerful approach to actually start first with students. Because that committee work is usually unpaid and it's happening at times that aren't often convenient, at least to our students. And so what this model offered was this a mutually beneficial exchange of learning and growth for the student who also gets credit in the institution who have honed a better honed policy made just better by students. So, but the most important thing that I think for me was that was powerful was it treated students as the adults that they are, recognizing that this tool is going to seriously impact their lives, and we trusted them to help us figure it out, figure out how best to support them in figuring out the guidance around the tool. So to me, this is the power of open pedagogy, creating the opportunity for learning to have real life meaning and application and for students to have more agency and direction about how and where they're taking their learning. So I wanted to give that as like one of these examples of this, some of the different ways that people are approaching it. And I want to now actually step back to all of you, and it sounds like this may have started to happen, but I'm curious in hearing or folks starting to think about like what is your vision, right? How do you think about what it could mean for how we get through this, or for how you step into a class feeling at your 10 with your students around generative AI, whether it's fully using it, partially using it, not using it at all. And so what we're going to do is for like 5 minutes, we're going to do a free write. And so you can, as I've often said, you can handwrite this, you can type it up, you can draw, you can just sit and think deeply. But what I'm looking for is to reflect on your vision of what collaboration and community-oriented engagement looks like with your students around generative AI. So the scenario is that I'm going to throw it into the chat just so that, again, we all have it. It's 5 years from now. Higher education is still waffling its way through generative AI. It hasn't really been as revolutionary as people have predicted, but it's still increasingly a part of professional people's lives, just like computers and the internet were. You've been hard at work attending events like attending every MYFest and other events, engaging with others, and working a lot with your students about what generative AI means for teaching and learning in your area. You've created a beautiful structure of collaboration with students in navigating AI. Now, what does this look like to you? What does your 10 look like from the beginning of the session, right? So you had a previous number. What would your 10 look like? So I'm actually going to mute myself and give you about 5 minutes to actually think about this, to kind of just consider in silence. And as I said, you can write it, physically write it, type it up, think about it in your head, draw it, whatever makes sense. But try to give this some thought for the next 5 minutes. Okay? Any questions before I mute myself? All right. Okay. So feel free to wrap up at your sentence or two. We're gonna actually go back into breakout rooms, and we're gonna share our visions with one another to kind of hear what folks are coming up with. So again, I'm gonna throw this into the chat so that folks can follow that as they get into the chat. But the goal will be share your vision across all three folks, and what do you see as the differences, similarities, or the things you want to borrow from one another, right? So give me 1 second to set that back up, and we're going to recreate. And all right, so we're going in for about 6 minutes. Converse with one another. What did you find? What is your vision, as concise as possible? And then, of course, once everybody shares, what are things that you see? What are things you can reflect back to one another? All right. So recreating the rooms and opening up all the rooms.
Welcome everybody.
Welcome back. I inevitably know that was not nearly enough time, as these things never are. But I hope folks started to kind of think about things and start to build some ideas. So I'm just curious, and again, feel free to put this in the chat, and we'll just kind of have 2 or 3 minutes about it. But 1 or 2 sentences about your vision. What is your 10? And maybe a sentence or so of what you ended up if you adapted or borrowed anything from anyone. Does anybody want to throw that into the chat, or even one person come off mute and share? Leaning into that long silence.
Okay, I can share a little bit of
Sure.
My name is Mahbat. I'm from AUC Cairo. So my Maha Bali is my mentor and icon in terms of anything that has to do with AI. I was sharing a room with James, and we were discussing to what extent students would understand how would they rely on AI, generally speaking. I teach media law and ethics, and we were discussing, and he introduced the ethical standards of how ethical it would be and how would they be guided into unethical usage. And I also talked about the legislative component, because who owns what comes from ChatGPT? Who owns what comes from Sora or even Figure One? Yani speech to video, speech to speech, text to video, and text to text, and now speech to speech. So what comes there? Who would claim ownership? And the students are always asking, why would we come to university? And I try to let them know that the difference would be information and knowledge. You can have information anytime now. Very well done, Kamen. But the knowledge that you have to make sense of the information that is gathered. And that's why you learn about stuff, how to analyze, how to evaluate, how to build on and create, and things of the sort. So I think AI as a tool to guide would be very beneficial. However, there are so many questions that are unanswered yet.
Absolutely. Denise, do you want to go?
Can I say something about it if I'm not talking too much about it?
Yeah.
I think we have something bigger here in front of us. Okay, I've conducted some research about AI. I've been using AI in my classes as much as I can, also for like assessment purposes, this and that. But there's a lot of things that we need to approach at institutional, if not international levels, because then that's going to become a problem of also equity. One of the things that we've been discussing, I think, a little bit everywhere. And ethical problems, yes, obviously that's expected, that especially in higher institutions. But regardless of that, we will be talking about ethical aspect of it, because is it something acceptable? Like, is it authentic, or is it plagiarism? This and that. Obviously, this is going to lead us to this kind of concerns. But I think there's also one more thing that we need to talk about. This requires kind of an altogether approach in redefining how, and even maybe training students' approach and teachers' approach to such technology, because altogether, I think education is going to be redefined in the aspect of all these terms. How do we perceive plagiarism? How do we perceive honesty? How do we perceive the purposeful use of technology? And how do we really make meaningful use of it? Do we really make meaningful use of it? And who's going to control this? Who's going to be the kind of checking mechanism on top of this? So while on one hand, this is going to be a little bit problematic in my opinion, on the other hand, it has to come in institutional levels so that we can start talking about frameworks. But again, this is going to be a little bit of a cacophony, because Turkey is going to have its own understanding of it. USA is going to have its own understanding of it. So I think there's a little bit of road that we have to go through before coming up with some fixed, if not firm, understanding of purposeful and effective use of AI within the classroom. But there's a lot that still needs to be clarified, but rather than that, to be redefined in terms of how we perceive things. So coming from a Y generation, I think we're also a little bit advantaged, because our perception of ethics, use of technology is at a good point, because we come from also a point where there was no technology. I mean, not really the technology of today. And at the same time, I think we can easily adapt to such technology. So we could be kind of a bridge to transmit this to our colleagues as much as our students. But I'm not sure if there's really something we can fix at the moment, but we're just working on it. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate that, Denise. And I think for me, that's one of the things when thinking about this, is like those big, broader questions and challenges are real. This is maybe my increasing lack of faith of those bigger, broader institutions that will have clear answers in 5 years. And so there's this interesting, despite that, what can we do in our classes? Or like, what can we try to, like, how can we get closer to the 10 that we want despite these other things? Because I don't fully believe we'll have clarity any more than we have clarity on like we're 30 years into the internet, and even that as a guarantee or a guarantee policy that is, you know, internationally accepted or clarified. So I think that's a bit of where I'm working from, and so that actually sets up this next last, you know, 2-minute reflection for folks to think about and hopefully share into the chat. And that is, you know, we talked about at the beginning, kind of you identified your number, and that was on that 10 scale. And then you had a little bit of a discussion about like, what does a 10 look like? And so what I'd love to ask for folks for like just 2 minutes of quick writing, and I'd love for folks to like start to write this into the chat and be able to share, but like, what would be one more step to get you to 10? So if you're at a 6, how do you, like, what's something tangible you can do for next time you're teaching to get you closer to that 10? Doesn't have to, like, we're not going for the 10, but what's the step in that direction? So I'm going to give folks just like 2 minutes to start to think about that. And like I said, we can put it into the chat when you're ready. Sorry. They're starting to come in. Jenny mentions push harder for student work to sit at an institutional level, where currently most of it sits inside the library or areas where she has oversight, with the hope that it will all sort of end up at the institutional level. Rebecca mentions give more time in class to develop a co-written policy, moving from kind of providing hers and giving about 15 minutes for students to give input and edits. Still, you know, that opportunity for dialogue is really great. Others. What do you think? What would be one more step to take? Help faculty who are open to talking with students to redesign and reimagine their teaching and assignments. From Yasser, absolutely. Any others want to share in the chat? Here's from Mervet. Use it more intensely in class and involve students in the AI ethical and legal challenges. However, keeping pace with AI progress is hard. Oh, yes, it is. It's like trying to drink from a fire hydrant, as they say. Awesome. Well, we are nearing the end of our session. And so I always like to kind of give a little bit of a slow send off because I know folks are either starting to leave or hopping into other things. But feel free to, as you're leaving, share in the chat anything that you've learned you picked up. I'm also going to include once again, the slide deck, how to keep in touch with me or follow the things that I'm working on. But kind of as that exit ticket, feel free to share, what's something that you're kind of thinking about, wanting to apply or look further into. Thank all of you showing up and engaging. That's the game. That's the thing we got to keep doing, right? Yeah, other people. That was my goal, was to have people more share. Awesome.